Can you imagine you start a business during the pandemics and it becomes a unicorn in just 1 year? That's amazing, right? And that's the story we're going to check it out today at this episode of the best of the best. So be with me. Now, the company we're talking about is Deel, which is kind of like a play with the word deal with in English. And Deel is basically a one-stop shop for remote hiring and paying, which is something like very complicated nowadays because with the pandemics, most companies have moved to remote work, and many companies are hiring employees elsewhere. So it becomes a little complicated. How can I do like compliancy, regulatory, labor rules like here in Brazil, which is very complicated, and how do I pay and all this? So Deel built this platform that you can pay and hire people all over the world with their digital platform and pay them, and it made the process really simple and not a bit complicated. And which is really crazy is that they started the company. Actually, they started a little before the pandemics, but the product itself was born during the pandemics. And in 2020, they experienced a 20x growth, which led investors to pour over $156 million into the company, valuating them in April in about 1.25 billion, which is a crazy valuation for a 1 year old company, right? It's an amazing case. It's one of the fastest unicorn ever, right? And look at their numbers. They're staggering. More than 150 countries, more than 3,000 customers served, and over 120 currencies that they work with. How is that even possible? Well, the first thing I want to highlight in their success is a thing that I believe you ever wondered, how companies that have like people all over the world, remote people working all over the world, how do they pay? How do they do compliance and all this? Probably at some point you've thought about that. When we look at corporations with multinationals, companies that they have like different headquarters in different part of the world, etc. It's a little easier to grasp because they already have something in place in that country. But companies that operate from like a different country and have employees in different countries, it becomes a little bit more complicated. But I bet that has at some point crossed your mind because it's something so obvious. In the digital world that we live in, it's something so obvious. And there was no solution prior to them. That's the craziest part, right? So it was under our nose. And sometimes the greatest innovations, they are under our nose. That's the first insight that I get from Deel. The greatest innovations are under our nose, and sometimes we never realized the power that those solutions had. And that's the first thing that I see in their story. It's an amazing story, a very fast case of success. It's really about speed. It's not about agility or anything. It's about speed. They were fast enough to get into 150 countries and get 3,000 customers, etc. So here they are. It's an innovation that was under our nose, and sometimes we don't see the small things, the small pains from our customer that are under our nose. And that's the first point for their success, and that we sometimes missed. Okay. Now, the second thing I would like to highlight in their story is what I call the self-pain issue. Okay. The self-pain opportunity, actually. Okay. The self-pain opportunity, and that's something that Y Combinator always bring to their founders, which kind of like goes against what most people in design thinking believes and some people in lean startup believes. Usually there's a saying that says, you might feel the pain, but it might not there be a market for your pain, and it might you might be the only person suffering with this problem, which is true. That's why you need to justify your goal and your company and your product with a well-developed research. Now, but Y Combinator and the founders are alumni from Y Combinator. It goes in the opposite direction. It says, if you feel this pain, you can become like the biggest authority on that field. So you need to use that self-pain problem to become like the biggest authority on the field. Okay, that's one of the key insights from alumni from Y Combinator, as we can see in the story with Airbnb and so many other successful companies. And we see that in their story. When they're talking in the news, they launched mentioning that they became a unicorn. They say here in this paragraph, okay, that's right, the global payroll solution built to help businesses hire anyone, anywhere, and uses the product themselves. So they are using their own product. And that's the opportunity. When you have a pain and you're trying to solve that problem for your own pain, you might become the biggest authority. And maybe in the future I'll be talking about Slack, but this is a great moment to talk about Slack, because Slack was the same thing. They were producing another software, another startup, and they didn't like emails and a lot of meetings and all this. So the developers come up with a new instant messaging system, and back then I believe Skype for Business was like the main competitor, and it sucked. Everybody knows that. So what did they do? They built Slack, and the company, the original company, the original product didn't scale, didn't have the growth expected. So the founders decided, okay, we have a lot of money from investors. Let's show this instant messaging platform for the investors and see if they think it's a good fit to use their money. And there you go. There you have Slack, And why did Slack work so well? Because they were the biggest authority on complaining about the instant messaging platform. And I see the same thing going with Deel. It's the self-paying opportunity. But let's continue. The number three, the third aspect on their strategy that I think worked so well is the networking, because they started based on a networking idea. So Alex, who's one of the founders, he's a French guy. He went to MIT, Imperial College, and all this prior to attending Y Combinator. And in this interview, he talks a little bit about his experience and his journey. And at some point, he decided to contact founders from successful startups in France, like Zenly and Happen. And those guys got back to him, and he managed to interview some of them. So you see, there are two key things that we can learn from his networking strategy. The first one was to learn from your networking. Okay, so he was building his networking in the startup realm, and he started learning from those people. And the second one is this: Jean de la Rochebrochard, which was an investor with Xavier Niel, which is one of the greatest entrepreneurs in France, that has like this famous Freebox telecommunications company. He was one of the interviewed from Alex, and he connected Alex to Andreessen Horowitz, and then he went to Y Combinator and all this. So you see, there are 2 points. Build your networking to learn from them, but also to use them. And he did exactly that. He both learned from his networking on the networking he was building, and he also used them. And that's something really different from what I see in the corporate environment, because when I used to work with the corporation, like big corporations, they're like very closed, and the startup world is completely different. They're very collaborative. And it was an amazing to me. Sometimes I didn't have a contact with a director inside the company I was working with, but at the same time, I was sending messages on LinkedIn and getting connected to famous VC founders, and investors and all this. And I was struck, look at this difference is an amazing difference. And many people who start in the corporate world never realize that the startup world is so different. So build your network, learn from them, but also use them. They're there. You're there to serve them, and they're there to serve you. So make some profit out of it. That's what Alex shows us, right? Now, the fourth thing that they produce, which I think it's amazing, and they're not the first one to do it, is the one-click experience. And I always talk to my clients that it doesn't matter your marketing piece and whatever you talk about yourself. What matters is what customers talk about yourself. So in their website, there's a lot of testimonials from customers, and this one is one of the who struck me. And they talk a lot about how difficult it was to have like different people with like different solutions, different places to work with and everything. So Deel came up, and now everybody needed to get inside the Deel platform to fulfill their forms and all this the way Deel was asking them to. And it first became like very good for them, right? A lot of less work they needed to do, but also that Deel had this mass pay button, So when you have everything set with labor issues solved and payments solved and all this currency and all this, you get to this mass pay button, and it pays everybody, and it schedules the payment and all this, And this one-click experience is something that many companies are benefiting from. Amazon was probably the first one to bring this with the one-click buy button. But later on, here in Brazil, we have Nubank that completely transformed the banking system here. Is one of the largest startups in the world, and they also have this like banking one-click banking experience, and Deel is bringing the same thing to payroll, which is way more complicated. At least it feels more complicated. And the fifth strategy for us to finish this analysis is the power of staff on demand, which is one of the attributes for exponential organizations. Now, the biggest differentiator, even commented by their customers, is their legal partners. And that's a very powerful case of staff on demand. Now, the greatest example and the easiest one for us to see is Uber. Is a great example of staff on demand. So when you have a ride, that Uber needs to fulfill, it hires a driver, right? So it's a staff that is not like full-time payroll, etc. for the company. It is just hired when needed. That's a staff on demand. That's the case of Uber. Now, what Deel managed to do is to have legal partners globally that are working for them on demand. And that's a completely different approach that some like old or traditional mindset corporation will never think of it, right? You will probably think, oh, we need to get into that country, hire someone on the legal department, start a legal department, etc., etc. They didn't think about that, They started, okay, as demand comes from different countries, we're going to get connected with different players that understand labor issues and all this. And now they have over 200 legal experts all over the globe, and they're working with like 150 countries, 120 currencies. Why? Because you can pay in crypto, you can pay in PayPal, credit card, whatever. All global solutions with the power of digital technologies. So these are the 5 key points that I see on the success of Deel, which is a startup I got to know like a month ago, and I'm completely in love with them. I would love to connect with Alex. Let's see if that's even possible in the future. Now, let's analyze their business model, okay? So the first thing I really see innovation here is their value proposition, which is like the one-stop shop payroll solution, right? So they have everything in their value proposition for the payroll. Okay, so they have everything, and I see this is one of their key differentiators. Now, I wouldn't even say that this is like a competitive advantage, but they're getting a customer segment that might be underserved, you know. But it's not like an innovation considering the customer segment that they're working with, which is people who hire remotely, you know, remote hiring. So companies that need remote hiring are their go-to customers. I'm not sure if that's an innovation, but I don't think anyone had ever looked at it, you know, and that's why they have such a huge success, right? Now, for me, again, the main reason they're different, you know, and the main reason they have experienced their success is that the legal, one of their key activities, which is legal work, is done by their legal partners, you know, and that's the Stefan the Man case that I mentioned to you. Okay, so for me, that's the number one reason why they managed to scale so fast and so amazingly, right? And finally, on the customer relationship side, we have this one-click experience, which is great. You know, many people think that you know, to have a great customer relationship and business with customer, you need to have a huge customer journey, you know, and have several different touch points and all this omni-channel blah blah thing that many consulting companies are talking about. But actually, no, the best customer experience is the simplest one. It's minimalism, you know, and one click, and that's it. That's the best user experience. So that's where I think they kind of like innovated in their business model. Now let's analyze the ExO Canvas. Well, I don't know if their purpose is very transformative, but it's massive, it's global, right? So I'll be giving an 8. There's a lot of people that are working remotely right now that are improving their lives because of that, but I wouldn't say that's like a very transformative. It is something more like personal, you know. But the massive, you know, doing like globally, I think that they have it very well. Now, Stefan the Man, I'm going to get like an exception here, and I'm going to give them 11. You know, out of 10, they get 11 because the work they did. You know, it's different to hire like drivers, that anyone who has a car becomes a driver. The other thing is to have like Stefan the Man for legal entities, you know, and legal partners. Is so much more complicated, and for me they did it well. Now every time you have a well done Stefan the Man, you must have a great community and you must be connected to them and all this. So number 10 there. Number 10 on the algorithms, you know, because their platform is so good, and as you can see by their customers like testimonials, it's way simpler. The process nowadays is way simpler. If you think about algorithms as processualizing stuff, they did it very well, and they managed to simplify the customer experience. And that also brings us to a number 10 on interfaces, because customers love it so much, which also gets us to a number 10 on their dashboards. Now, leveraged assets, I'm not sure. I think they already do a great work with Stefan the Man. So I'll be giving like here an 8, because I think they can... They look good because they're working with the assets from those legal partners, etc. But I don't know anything else that might be impactful with this idea. Now, in their own comments, they say they use a lot of social technologies, Zoom calls, and all this. Let's leave the 8, but as I mentioned, experiments, autonomy, social technologies, I wouldn't have to be inside the company to understand a little bit better. It's very connected to their culture. What I can see, and I'll leave the 8 over there, is that since they grow so much in 2020, I believe they do a lot of experiments, and since they're always bringing new legal partners, etc. Probably those legal partners, they have a lot of autonomy to do anything they need, so they can work with different countries. So I feel that's a great initiative, but again, I'm not there to understand their culture, right? And finally, on the engagement piece, I will give a 10 because the customers, they always like are happy with their customer service. Everything's so smooth, so simple. So let's give them a 10. And here we go, the analysis of Deel. And the most important aspect of this analysis for me are those two first ones. Great innovations sometimes are under our nose and we're not realizing them. And the second one is the self-paying opportunity. You can become the greatest authority in something that you feel the pain, so don't waste that. Do a lot of research to guarantee there's a powerful market behind it, but you have a great opportunity to be successful. I hope you enjoyed this new edition of The Best of the Best. See you next week.